All right, let me first share the poll here. So thank you everyone for attending today's session. So those of you who had attended a previous session with us on bringing up Nexus Dashboard from scratch, this is the second session to follow up on that. For those of you who had not attended the session, don't worry, we've got a QR code. You can access the recording, but this is a follow-up to talk about how to connect your ACI to NDI once you bring up Nexus Dashboard. So we do have a Slido for those of you who just joined. If you can go ahead and complete that poll. In-band management is something that we'll cover in detail in today's session, but we wanted to get an idea on how your current knowledge is on in-band management, if you have it configured, and if you don't have it configured. So it looks like everyone so far knows what in-band management is, which is great. We will cover that still, but yeah, that's great. So let me go ahead and start the presentation. And thank you for completing that.
And one other thing about so we'll use the Slido for Q&A too. So if you have any questions, please toss them in the Slido and we'll be happy to answer. Welcome.
All right. So again, thank you for attending today's session. This is Amplifying Your ACI Operations using Nexus Dashboard Insights. My name is Larissa Overby. I'm a technical marketing engineer. We also have Joey Restaino, who is also going to be doing the demo in today's session. And Krishma and Shah, you'll see on the call, they're also going to help with Q&A. All right, so we're going to do a quick overview on Nexus Dashboard Insights. You don't necessarily need to know what it is to attend this session, but we'd like to give you a little bit of an overview on it so you can understand the power of Nexus Dashboard Insights and why it's important to connect your ACI fabric. We are going to talk about the site preparation. So there's prerequisites that you're going to need to connect your ACI to NDI. In-band management, again, is a big piece of this, so we'll talk about that. And then the two different designs, these we actually covered in detail in last session, but we'll talk to what the configuration requirements are as it pertains to these different designs when you connect your ACI fabric to NDI. We'll briefly talk about fabric node policies that are required for flow requirements, and then we'll do a demo. So we'll actually go through the ACI site onboarding, and we'll talk through a couple use cases. All right, so Nexus Dashboard, what is Nexus Dashboard? So Nexus Dashboard actually has multiple services that run on it. So it's a combined single platform where you can leverage the data broker services, consuming different data from different points, orchestration where you're orchestrating different environments, your cloud environments and your on-prem environments. Insights, which we'll talk a little bit about today, that's consuming all this information from your devices and controllers. Fabric Controller, where you can configure VXLAN, EVPN, various NXOS devices, and then SAN Controller that allows you to manage and monitor your SAN environment. So all these different services can be installed on Nexus Dashboard platform itself. So what is Nexus Dashboard Insights? Nexus Dashboard Insights pulls in all this different network telemetry data. So it's pulling in all this data from devices and from different controllers, and it's consuming all this information, and it's in a 5 tuple consumption, and all this data ends up getting put into Nexus Dashboard Insights. And Nexus Dashboard Insights then correlates all this different information to give you visibility into your analytics, giving you visibility into what's going on your network, what's going on your devices, and providing you with troubleshooting information as well as compliance information. So how this all ends up getting pushed is we're leveraging the in-band network for this. So all this data is actually being, it's traversing your ACI fabric. So a lot of this information, this information is a lot of information. And so if you guys remember from the previous session, we have a management interface on the platform, which is 1 gig. But then we also have our data interfaces, which is 10 gig. So the platform itself, it's going to consume all this different information. And so leveraging that 10 gig interface, leveraging that data interface for that in-band network is going to be the most effective. So that's how we've designed it. So with all that different data consumption, what can you actually do? So here's a high-level feature set list of the different applications and the different features within Insights. So all the different visibility and troubleshooting features, endpoint analytics, flow analytics, capacity planning. You can also do assurance and compliance. So looking at pre-change analysis, actually looking at configuration that you would be implementing and making sure that doesn't affect anything, or getting that visibility that it may affect something, so you need to change something. Advisory and maintenance. So if you need any assistance with upgrading, if you have TAC cases or any advisories on the code. So in the last session, we talked about this 4-step approach on deploying Nexus Dashboard, deploying, and then connecting to your fabric. So this is a session where we're talking about connecting to the fabric. That's the fourth item. In the last session, we talked about identifying your use case. Our example was Insights. We also talked about then determining your footprint and co-hosting support, which we're leveraging a 3-node physical cluster, and then reviewing the deployment guide and requirements. And then our next, actually, let me go back. So we do have the meeting recording here. You'll be given all these slides, so you can look at that from that last session if you missed it. So like I said, we're now looking at site preparation, and this is preparing the fabrics to connect to Nexus Dashboard Insights. We're focusing on ACI in this session. We do have NDFC fabric preparation, and that's in January. That session's in January. So the QR code is there if you would like to register for that session. All right, so site preparation. What is it that we need to do to actually connect Nexus Dashboard Insights to our ACI fabric? Well, as I mentioned, in-band management is a requirement because we're traversing, all the data is traversing our ACI fabric. We also have PTP. So precision time protocol is a requirement as well. This is a requirement for latency monitoring and flow telemetry. So these are some of the significant features that NDI provides. And also NTP, based on what, based on all, to get all the logging data, get that information, the time and date information. All right, so in-band management, what is that? Well, based on the Slido, it sounds like a lot of you guys have an idea of what this is, which is great. That may make me think that you most likely have ACI already deployed. In-band management is important in an ACI fabric. So there's some configuration that is required for this to be done, but this is something that allows you to manage your infrastructure, leveraging that in-band network. So when you configure in-band management, all of the nodes are assigned an in-band IP address. So you define that within ACI. And all those IP addresses are then associated to a bridge domain. And all of your access policies need to be defined that allows you to access APIC from this data, this in-band management network. And then there's a bond interface that ends up getting created using those existing data links. The L3 out then needs to be created, and that's created in the management in-band VRF. This allows users, in our example here, Nexus Dashboard, to access the in-band IP addresses for management. And as typical ACI Fabric, you're going to need to define those access policies so they can, so Nexus Dashboard can access that. So we also have those contracts that allows that communication to be sent. So we're going to cover two different cluster options as we did in the first session, layer 3 network, or what's often referred to as layer 3 out, and then ACI Fabric. This is the preferred option. And this is actually what we're going to demo, what Joey's going to demo in later in this session. So this is where we're leveraging a layer 3 network. We're leveraging that layer L3 out to communicate all of the information between Nexus Dashboard and APIC. So what is the configuration requirement for the ACI Fabric for when you're connecting the layer 3 network? Well, it's just configuring that layer 3 out. So that's configuring that tenant, that's configuring that bridge domain, and that's configuring all of that tenant information. So if you already have in-band management configured, which most likely you would have, or you're going to, there's nothing else that you need to do except for connecting that Nexus Dashboard cluster to that layer 3 network. So in this case, your Nexus Dashboard is essentially just another client connecting via that L3 out. So it's very, very simple if you already have the layer 3 network configuration. There are some ports that are needed to be opened when you're in the layer 3 network mode. Most likely this is going to be if you have a firewall connected. And so you can see here, this is more for reference. So what if you have it directly connected? So in the other session, we talked about direct connect, where you can actually connect your Nexus Dashboard cluster directly to your leaf. What's required there is going to be the same type of configuration that's needed when you connect anything to your leaves. So it's going to be your Fabric access configuration, your EPGs, your BD, as well as that in-band management configuration that we had just talked about. So you may see why the preferred option is layer 3, but in addition to the additional configuration that you have for direct connect, when you leverage that L3 out, it allows you to be able to easily expand. So if you end up adding another Fabric into your environment, or you add NDFC into your environment, all you need to do is connect to that network and easily be able to consume that information and get it sent to NDI. So lastly, before we go to the demo, is once you either connect through the L3 out, connect through direct connect, do that configuration, the respectable configuration on APIC, depending on how, if you want to use NetFlow or if you want to use flow telemetry, which is one of the features of Nexus Dashboard Insights, you would need to configure the flow telemetry policy or the NetFlow policy. And this is going to be on APIC that you can see here. So we're enabling DOM, And then we're either specifying telemetry as the priority or NetFlow as the priority.
There's one thing I want to call out here, Larissa, as well, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Is that digital optics monitoring, or DOM, is not a requirement for flow telemetry or NetFlow, but it's something that we recommend customers configure if they want the statistics for the actual QSFPs and optics themselves. Because by default, we don't actually enable that monitoring. So by doing this, you'll be able to consume that with an NDI as well.
Yeah, thank you, Joy, for pointing that out. It's not required, but to get that additional information from those SFPs and your optics, then you will want to enable DOM. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. I don't know if there's any questions that we.
Yeah, there's a couple coming in. I think what we'll do for now is we'll have those answered in the chat or in the Slido, and then what we can do is talk about a few at the end if there's because perhaps some of them will be answered during the demo. So we'll see.
Sure. So I'll pass it to you to go through the demo.
Just go to the next slide for me, Larissa, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Yeah. So hi everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces from the previous session. I'm hoping that the kind of the session series, I guess, that you could say we're doing is going to help enable you to try out Nexus Dashboard, and specifically regardless of the fabric that you may have deployed. So for the purpose of a demo, I'm going to show you several different things. But the first thing I want to walk through is a typical, very small lab ACI fabric that I have, and how we're actually going to configure the in-band management on that fabric to export all the telemetry information that Larissa talked about to Nexus Dashboard itself. So for the context of this demo, this is the topology that I have in my lab. I'm deploying the preferred method of connecting Nexus Dashboard to ACI, which is via an L3 out. As Larissa articulated in her slides, the reason that we prefer this is there's several different reasons, but one of them is it's what we already do if you have in-band management configured, right? You have an L3 out that you're advertising the in-band addresses of the fabric out of. So if you already have that deployed, then you can simply just connect Nexus Dashboard on that L3 out and you're good to go, right? No additional configuration, besides maybe if you wanted to limit the scope of the ND to the in-band via some contract, but that's essentially it. It's already there. It's already a requirement, right? So in my lab, I have a very simple 2-leaf single spine ACI fabric, with a single APIC. All 4 of those devices, the APIC and the 3 switches, will have an in-band address that I'll be assigned. And then I'm also configuring an L3 out to 2 redundant NXOS switches that I'll be running OSPF between that will advertise the in-band subnets out of. And I also then have my Nexus Dashboard connecting directly to that, right? So it's a very simple design. Your network could be a lot larger than this. You could have multiple BGP hops or OSPF areas that this goes across. That's fine. For my lab, it's very simple. And so on the Nexus Dashboard, we have the management and we have the data interfaces. Well, I think you guys can see where I'm going with this. The data interfaces connect to my NXOS switches, and then I advertise that subnet also into OSPF so that I have complete bidirectional communication between both the in-band subnet and my data network. And so now my Nexus Dashboard cluster can communicate directly to the in-band network on my ACI fabric. All right, let me share my screen. If I can find it, remote desktop, there we go. Quick check, does it look okay? All set?
Yep.
Okay. So I have multiple different ACI fabrics in this setup, but the one I'm going to show you for the in-band configuration, the one that I just showed for the topology, is this fabric here, my second fabric. So like anything in ACI, you'll have to configure access policies. Okay, so what do we have in this topology? Well, we have our interfaces for our L3 out, and we also have interfaces for the APICs. Now, in order for you to configure in-band management, you also need to configure access policies for the APIC, which is a little bit different from how you would typically configure access policies. Typically, you configure interfaces for hosts, whether it's VMware servers or bare metal servers, or switches that are extending layer 2, or routers and switches that are extending layer 3. But in this particular case, for in-band management, we also have access policies for the APIC. If you look at some of the VLAN pools and physical domains that I created I have a physical domain for my APIC, and I also have a physical domain for my L3 out. Now, for the APIC, what we're going to do is we're going to allocate a VLAN ID that we're going to use to actually create a bonded subinterface from the in-band links on the APIC. And so if you look at this VLAN pool that I allocated, I'm going to use VLAN 1. The way I see it in my head is VLAN 1 is typically a VLAN that goes unused. And in ACI, we actually don't have VLAN 1 defaulted on any switch port, unlike normal networking devices. So I'm just going to use VLAN 1 as my in-band VLAN, and it's also not something that's going to be exposed on any other front-facing port in the fabric either. Now for my L3 out, I'm actually doing routed interfaces. So I'm not doing routed subinterfaces, and I'm not doing SVIs. So I actually don't have to create a VLAN pool with any range of VLANs in there because I'm not going to use a VLAN .1Q tag port. I'm going to use routed interfaces. If your requirement is that you deploy an L3 out that's also being deployed on interfaces that are layer 2, you'd want to use an SVI, so that way you can simply extend layer 3 over that layer 2 interface. Or if you do a routed subinterface, you'd also want to specify the VLAN endcap that you're going to use. But in my case, I don't have one using routed interfaces. So let's now go into my leaf interfaces. If you look at some of the profiles I've configured, I'm adhering to best practices. So if you were to go in and look at any other collateral that we have on ACI best practices around access policies, you'd probably see a similar theme where we have the switch profile and the leaf profile. And we want a one-to-one binding. So if I have 2 leaf switches, and those leaf switches are also in a VPC, I would have 2 leaf profiles for the individual switches, and then I'd have an additional leaf profile for my VPC domain. That way, when I go to configure ports, if it's a single connected or an active standby interface, I would do it on the individual profiles. But if it's a VPC interface, I would do it on the VPC profile. And that way, just organizationally, I know whether or not these interfaces are either VPC attached or locally attached. Okay, that's something that we typically adhere to and typically or certainly document. And I'm doing the same thing in my lab. Now, if you look at one of these switches, for example, you'll see I have the interface defined for the APIC. And that interface, I also have a policy group for. So if we go and look at this policy group, you'll see that we have an association to that domain that I created for the APIC. And that association happens through what's called an AEP. Now, I feel like I'm deviating away from NDI to APIC integration. I'm talking about access policies, which is fine. But it's important to know that we associate these ports to a policy group that has a list of 1 or more domains that we have access to. And that's how we enforce whether or not certain configurations can get deployed to these ports in a multi-tenant environment. So you can see I have a specific AEP which actually calls out my domain that I've created. Now, I think you can guess, or reasonably guess, where I'm going with the L3 out ones. I have 2 interfaces for each node. Those interfaces connect to my router, and those are also being used for my layer 3 out. So on ports 7 and 8 on both of these nodes, I have a specific L3 out, which ties it back to the domain for my L3 out. Let's get out of access policies. Enough of that boring talk. Let's go and look at where the meat of all of this is. So if we go into my management tenant and we look at some of the configuration here, what do we have? Well, the first thing that we have is an L3 out. Now, I've configured this L3 out in a way that's running OSPF, and it has my 4 interfaces that need to be attached. So if I look at my routed interfaces for both leaf 1 and leaf 2, I have point-to-point connections that go to both of those NXOS switches. I also have those nodes configured with loopbacks because that's a requirement in order to do L3 outs. You have to define which nodes and then also the ports. And then any specific configuration for OSPF or BGP, what have you, that can be defined on the L3 out. Doesn't matter really if you're doing static or BGP or OSPF. This is simply an IP transport vehicle for the in-band network. So it does not matter which routing protocol you choose. This just happens to be OSPF in my lab. Now the important piece, which VRF am I associated to? I'm associated to the default INB VRF, which comes prepackaged on any ACI fabric. This is something that's already there and you simply just leverage when you deploy it. And then if you go and look at the EPG that I have an all zeros here because I don't have any other L3 outs in this VRF, If I did, I might want to be careful about what I'm classifying, but you could also simply add the subnet of your Nexus dashboard here to enforce certain contracts. Now, in my case, I'm using a allow all contract. You don't have to do that. As long as you have a contract that allows the ports that are in the slide deck that we just presented, the Nexus Dashboard Insights would be able to consume telemetry. So if you simply wanted to limit the scope of what is accessible to the in-band for Nexus Dashboard, you can do so by doing a contract that limits the ports and also applying a subnet that limits the data network range. Okay? Now, if we go and look at what else is required, well, we'll need a few things. We'll need a bridge domain. Now, what is this in-band bridge domain? It is a bridge domain that is going to be associated for all of the in-band addresses that we allocate. So when I configure my in-band addresses for my leafs, for my spines, this is the bridge domain that they're a part of. So it would also be prudent, recommended, highly recommended, that you put it in the same VRF as the L3 out, right? So if we have it in the INB, then we can simply advertise a subnet, which in my case is 192.168.2.x/24. We can mark it as advertised externally, and then we can associate it to the L3 out. That way we can advertise it dynamically out of our OSPF routing protocol, right? Aside of that, we have a couple of the things that we introduced. Now I'm going into detail here. I know a lot of you on the call understand in-band management, but I just want to make sure that we do round it out by going over it. We create an in-band management EPG, and this is where we define the VLAN that the APIC will use for its bonded subinterface. In my case, it was a VLAN 1, ties back to that VLAN pool I created. And then we also have the bridge domain that it's associated to, and then the contracts. So now, anytime we have an in-band address that we configure in this EPG, it's going to be advertised out of the L3 out, that subnet, for reachability, and it's also going to have access via these contracts that we have relationships to on the L3 out. So now, where do we actually configure those? Under the node management addresses, we can define static addresses. So you can see for all 4 of my nodes, I have my out-of-band, and then I also have in-band configured with the respective in-band EPG. So now anybody that connects on my L3 out will have access to these IP addresses that are in my in-band. Now, again, organizational tip, the way I do it is APIC is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Maybe even up to 7. And then for my node IDs, I append the last 4 or the last octet as my node ID. That way I know, hey, if it's 2.101, that's leaf 2. If it's 2.102, that's leaf 102. Right? And that's something that I do organizationally if you have the ability to do this based on your IP scheme. Now, if we go into my NXOS switches, let's do that quickly. The way I have this set up is I have a dedicated VRF for Nexus Dashboard. And this VRF is where I'm going to aggregate not just the data interfaces for my Nexus Dashboard, but also the OSPF sessions that I have for my, okay? So if you look at OSPF, you'll see I have quite a few different neighbors here. And that's because since I'm doing the L3 out design, I can easily just attach more ACI fabrics or even NXOS fabrics to this routed infrastructure on this VRF. And then I can build connections to all of them and consume them all from a single dashboard, okay? And that's why using an L3 out is preferred, is because it gives you a little more flexibility in the amount of sites that you onboard and also how those fabrics connect. So I believe these 2 are the router IDs that I have associated for site 2, so everything's up in full. If I were to look at the routing table, you should see that my 192.168.2.0 subnet is being advertised via OSPF. And I also have my data network advertised as well, so the ACI fabrics can reach it. You know, we could do a quick ping test. Let's ping the first address. All right, we have reachability from the switch. Everything's up. So now, after that's done, which I think is done for a majority of the people based on the Slido, we can actually go and consume it on Insights. So let's first jump over to the admin console where we have the general overall management of our Nexus Dashboard cluster. If you were to look at this cluster, it's a 3-node physical cluster, okay? I have a data network configured in the 192.168.10 network. So really what this means is my 10 network needs to talk to my 2 network, right? And if I can do that, then I'll be able to start streaming telemetry to this cluster. Okay. The way that you add sites is you go to Nexus Dashboard and you say, add site. Now, I already have this site added to ND because I'm using it for Orchestrator as well, that I did not have an opportunity to decommission for the demo. But the way you would add this is you would simply add it using what I would recommend, the in-band management IP address. Okay. You can add the out-of-band management IP address as well. And what will happen is we'll discover the in-band address and start streaming telemetry. But I always tell customers or partners or whoever it is, if you add the in-band address here and it fails, you know you have some type of IP connectivity problem between your in-band on ND to APIC. And you can use that to kind of troubleshoot what that issue might be. So if you select the in-band and go through this and submit it and it's not working, you at least know, okay, there's a problem with my data network connecting to my APIC. Why don't we go ahead and take a look at what that might be? So if you look at the site that we just onboarded, you see we have the management address, and we also have the data network IP address of the APIC that we onboarded it with. We have the firmware. We have a very general overview of what this is. But this is just Nexus Dashboard as a whole. This is just the platform which is hosting the services that we have, right? So how do we actually go into Insights and onboard this fabric and start consuming all of this rich telemetry information? Well, because we already added it within Nexus Dashboard, we can then go and we can add the sites within that. Give me one moment, please. So you can see here, I've intentionally omitted Site 2 from Insights because I want to walk you through what it's like to add it. The cool thing about Insights is that when you've already onboarded it through Nexus Dashboard, it immediately shows up for you. Okay, so if you take step 1 as onboarding to ND and then you go to Insights, you can simply just click on the already onboarded fabric and start walking through the wizard. We go and we give it a town that or a city maybe that it's located to. This is so that we can pin it on the map. And then we also go and we assign the in-band EPG this is configured for. Now, what's going to happen is we're actually going to go and we're going to query the APIC at this point, and we're going to see how many in-band EPGs are deployed. Now, you probably only have one. So in this case, I do. It auto-discovered it, and we'll select it. We're going to give the credentials so that we can authenticate to this APIC. We need to query the API. We need to do some auditing of the configuration for compliance and other features. So if you give the credentials, whether it's a domain or not, we can go and we can onboard the fabric. So after we go and we view all the information and say everything looks great, we'll go ahead and onboard it. And after you do that, you'll start to see here that telemetry is going to start being streamed to this fabric. Now it's going to take a little while for the telemetry to show up. So what I'll do now is I'll go to another fabric where I can start walking you through some of the use cases for this product. And then we'll go back and we'll double check that everything is showing green after. Time check, perfect. All right, so let's go walk through Insights on some already onboarded fabrics, okay? I have this other ACI fabric here, and I'm also going to kick off a traffic flow briefly so that I can do some quick demos for you. Second. Go. Traffic's running. So we can go and let's look at some of the telemetry information here. So lots and lots of data that we collect, and we do very, very cool things with it. We collect a lot of data, which means this in-band network is very powerful for us, right? 10 gig and above interfaces that we can stream data from, and also give us a really reliable pipeline that we can actually get the data out of the fabric. The way that we lay this out is in a very, very clear and concise way. We have what's called anomalies, and we'll get into what those are. But anomalies are really a way for us to detect what issues, what compliance violations, what drops, what anything that might be a problem in your environment, that might be an operational issue you need to solve, those get raised as anomalies. And we go into a lot of detail as to what's broken, what triggered it, and how we fix it. But we also have advisories too. So is something end of life? Is your hardware outdated? Do you need to upgrade? What PCerts or other bugs might be impacting your environment? Because I feel like at Cisco, we're very transparent about those things. Those can all get sucked into Insights and alert you based on your hardware and software version, and also anything that might be configuration related as far as are you susceptible to a bug, right? But we also give you very easy ways to jump around and view components in your environment. For example, you could just simply click on the number of endpoints here, and it gives you all the endpoints in your fabric. Now, I've been working on ACI for a while. I worked in TAC. I worked on escalations before, and I feel like this is always something where in APIC, it was not very easy to do. Insights is trying to say, hey, here's all the endpoints in your fabric, and if there's an anomaly on them, in this case, there isn't for an endpoint, it would be highlighted first. So everything by default is filtered on the anomaly level. So let's say you're troubleshooting a problem, and you're saying, hey, the web server with this IP address is having intermittent connectivity. Well, you could just go to your endpoints, and if the web server has an anomaly on it, it would be highlighted first, and you'd be able to go look at it. So we do this for everything, right? Whether it's the physical interfaces or whether it's endpoints, everything would be filtered based on whether there was an anomaly that's raised. So let's go look at what anomalies exist. And let's just filter on everything. Okay. So we raise anomalies again for a lot of different reasons. What I want to kind of focus on is compliance. Okay. So we have this concept of compliance, meaning you can actually tell Insights that a certain configuration should be deployed a certain way. And if it's not deployed that way, whether it's not something the user configured or whether it's something that maybe didn't get trickled down into the hardware properly for whatever reason, we can actually alert and tell you that there's a compliance violation that has happened, right? So in this case, what I can do is I have a couple different EPGs that are part of what's called the preferred group, meaning all of these EPGs should have implicit allowed communication across everything that's in them. So do not rely on contracts, just specifically allow all communication. And if you have an application that might want to be part of the preferred group, you can set up a compliance rule that tests and checks for exactly that. So you could say here, if there's any EPG that's not part of this preferred group, you need to alert me. And that's exactly what it will do. It says, hey, there's a compliance violation here because this EPG, which is supposed to be part of the preferred group, is actually excluded. And we can even go a step further too. We can even look at communications violations. So what's the impact of this? Well, if this is not part of the preferred group, well, things aren't going to be able to communicate properly. So we can actually check for that as well. So because this is not part of the preferred group, we can raise anomalies saying, hey, these two EPGs are supposed to be able to have implicit communication, and they don't. Well, why don't they? Well, because you might want to add them to the preferred group. So we have recommended solutions that we can also offer within the anomalies to help it easier for the administrator to understand, hey, why is NDI barking about this? And why is this compliance violation being violated, right? Now, this is just one example of anomalies. There's tons of other anomalies like, hey, maybe I'm congested and dropping packets, or maybe I have certain bugs or p-certs that I'm susceptible to that I need to go and dive into, right? And if you have that type of visibility as an operator, it makes it easy to kind of get an end-to-end visibility or end-to-end compliance check and also telemetry check for your entire environment. So let me dive into some of the connectivity. So what do we show you when it comes to connectivity? Well, we give you a lot of things that APIC provides you itself, but we enhance it. So again, whether it's an interface or a layer 3 neighbor or an endpoint or a domain, right? We have anomaly scores that get associated to all these components, and we also can filter easily on whether or not there's issues for a particular component. But we also have flows. Okay, so we have the ability to show you what the ASIC is actually seeing and export that to Nexus Dashboard Insights. So if you were to think about how you would troubleshoot a flow, whether it's a source or destination or an application to application, right? You typically always say, hey, what's the source and destination IP address? Or how can we actually go and trace this through the network? You could go and spend a ton of time getting span captures. You could go and leverage ELAM, whether it's the application or on the box, to actually see if the packet's getting to the fabric. But we can also take it a step further, and we can export in real time all of the flows that are coming in from the ASIC via the in-band that we have connected to Insights and show you what's happening. So you can see here that I have several different flows that are look to be, raising anomalies. Now I'll clue you in on a little secret. I kicked off a performance test here to congest the port, just so I can show you some of the visibility that this product can give you. But if you look at, let's say, this flow, for example, not only do we have the topology that this flow runs through, which is already beneficial enough, we've already answered several different questions, including, is this endpoint all 100s even sending traffic? Well, we can answer that question, yes. Is it sending traffic to the fabric? We can answer that question, yes. And then we can even understand, is it getting across the fabric? And if so, what's happening to it? And we have the full end-to-end visibility from ingress interface to ingress EPG, destination EPG, and also if the packet was dropped. So we know exactly where, on which switch, on which interface a packet could be dropped. And we also tell you the reason for this as well. I really like to do this demo because buffering is something that we do see in the field, and it's very, very difficult to troubleshoot because you'll have intermittent connectivity across a variety of different applications. You'll have, latency that might spike. And really, unless you're looking at drop counters or other things, it's not a very obvious problem to troubleshoot. Buffering, and not to get too in the weeds here, but buffering is also something that happens pretty far down the pipeline of the ASIC. Meaning when that packet comes in and goes through its pipeline, buffering is one of the almost last stages that it hits before it gets sent out. And we still have the visibility and we still have the capability in our hardware and our cloud scale ASICs to export this, even though it's basically at the last stage before the packet goes out. All right. So we know on this leaf that this packet was dropped. It was dropped because there was buffer exhaustion. And we have the full path and the full, exact, visibility into the whole path, but also exactly where the problem was introduced. Okay. Now we could also go and take a look at this leaf and take a look at this port that this traffic was connected on, right? And we also have visibility into trends and statistics. Sorry, wrong one. Let me go back to my flow. Yeah, this leaf. Sorry, back to the interface. And we can also see whether or not there was traffic that was transmitted out. So you can see here that at this point in time, we're able to graph that my utilization increased. Okay, so we can actually graph not only the trends and what's happening in real time, but we can also try and use this to understand, hey, why is this port congested? What is it congested all the time? Is it intermittent? And we can try and use that data to correlate, is there a backup job being run, or what type of traffic is coming on my network? And flows can also help you understand what are the impacted hosts and addresses that are actually being impacted by this problem. Now, the way that you actually enable flow telemetry is in the settings. Now, there are certain considerations for doing so. I think there was a question that came in about when would you use flow telemetry versus NetFlow, right? Those are all really good considerations. Let me talk a little bit about that. You can only do one of these modes, but you cannot do both. So I have a lot of customers saying, Joey, this flow telemetry looks awesome. But I'm a NetFlow customer. I already have NetFlow being exported to StealthWatch or some other platform, right? If that's the case, you can continue using NetFlow, and you can also just send it to Insights, right? But you can't enable flow telemetry and NetFlow. You have to make a decision as to which one you would like to use, okay? Now, what are the benefits of flow telemetry over NetFlow? Really, it comes down to the metadata that we're exporting in real time. The source and destination EPG, the source and destination port, what spines and leaves it's flowing through, but then also, and most importantly, is the packet being dropped? Is it being dropped because there's no route? Is it being dropped because there's a no contract that allows it? Or is it being dropped due to congestion and buffering? And these are really low-level things that we can detect in real time based on the flow that's being introduced, right? NetFlow doesn't give you the drop visibility or even some of the other metadata. It only gives you some sampled bits that you can use to say, hey, at this time we were receiving the traffic and on these devices. There was also a question about scalability. How do I know that I'm not exceeding the amount of flows based on my footprint? Because unfortunately, there is a limit to the number of flows that we can export. That limit is dictated based on the number of Nexus Dashboard nodes that you do have in the fabric. But you can see here on a very small scale, I only have about 25 flows per second. On a production network, this could be huge, right? I also try and tell customers, flow telemetry shouldn't necessarily be something that we use as an on-demand persistent monitoring solution, right? I typically recommend that customers monitor very critical services or very critical subnets. And also, if you're in a live debugging window, install a rule for the specific source and destination subnets or endpoints that you're troubleshooting to start getting that visibility in real time. So if you look at some of the rules that I have configured, you can see here that in this tenant, in this VRF, I only have a couple different hosts or subnets that I'm currently monitoring. I could expand this or I could subtract this, and that would impact the amount of flows per second that the cluster gets, okay? So it's always something to keep in mind. If we use this as more of a monitor critical services or live debugging, then we can really keep the flow scale down while still maximizing the value of the telemetry. Now, flow visibility, obviously fantastic. Anomalies, advisories, P-certs, obviously fantastic. What other things do we have within this platform? In this latest release, we've taken all of the great functionality and we've kind of simplified it and consolidated it into what's called an analysis hub. Okay. So if you want to look at something on the site level, you can do that. But if you want to kick off a workflow for something, it's going to be within the analysis hub. So, we have a ton of different things that you can check. Here are my compliance. This is where I'm actually going and dictating what those compliance rules may be and what those compliance violations may be. So if I wanted to go and set up another rule that says this EPG has to talk to this L3 out, or this EPG must be consuming this contract, or what have you, there's a ton of different things that you can have NDI check compliance for. You can do that within the analysis hub. We also have features like sustainability. You can actually see what the carbon footprint for a particular site might be, right? You can not only see, okay, not only is this the kilowatt hours that I'm consuming based on an estimate from the power company in my area, but I can also estimate cost based on a value that you dictate. So you should be able to go and modify the site settings if you know for certain this is how much you're paying per kilowatt hour. And then you can go and you can monitor all of the sustainability information from your sites and use that in a really powerful and green way. Moving forward, we also have features like pre-change analysis. It's great that you alert me that we have all of these anomalies. It's great that I had a problem and I realized the problem was I didn't enable that tiny little knob on the EPG called prefer group that I needed. But is there a way that I can actually go and implement changes and have NDI alert me that I'm missing configuration or I'm breaking compliance before I actually go and push that change? And that is something that NDI will give you as well. Now, I've created some pre-change analysis that I'll show you because it takes about 5 or 10 minutes to run this. But the way this workflow works is you would give it a name. You select the site that you want to do the pre-change against, and you choose a snapshot. The snapshots are running at a certain interval, 2 hours by default. And I can show you how you can kick it off on demand as well. But what the snapshot is doing is it's going and auditing all of the configuration on the ACI fabric, and it's using that to check for best practices and things that you might want to be alerted of, that maybe your configuration is not in a compliant way, deployed in a compliant way, or maybe there's simply a best practice that you're missing, right? We also leverage these snapshots to do pre-change analysis with, because what we're going to do is we're going to compare the latest snapshot or any snapshot that you might choose against a piece of configuration. That piece of configuration can be built out manually using just add, modify, or delete operators of certain objects. Or what you can do is you can use a simulator or some other tool to grab the JSON. So you might even have something like Ansible that you can generate JSON or XML with. And we have demos where we can show you how to leverage Ansible and NDI pre-change within the same automation scheme. So you could use that, or you could just generate XML or JSON however you'd like and upload that file. And then it will go and run that analysis based on what's currently configured in the snapshot and what would be pushed to the site. So if we go and look at, let me cancel out of here and go and look at one of the pre-changes that I ran, what we tell you is, here's a snapshot of everything that happened before and everything that's going to happen after we deploy the change, right? This Venn diagram is very interesting here because I can see clearly that there's one issue in my major category that's being raised after I deployed my pre-change. Now, important to note, this did not get pushed to my fabric. This was a simulation that I ran based on the configuration that I do want to post, whether it's manually or with automation. And you can see here that it tells you the exact anomaly that is going to get raised if I were to go and deploy that. So in this case, there is a subnet across BDs that overlaps. So let's go and look at what that means. Well, what it's going to tell you is all of the details of the anomaly and why this is going to cause a problem for you. What this is trying to tell you is that you are actually going to leak a route into a different VRF where that prefix is already present. So you're going to actually cause a subnet overlap within a particular VRF. And the reason that's happening is because that you're providing a specific contract that perhaps you may not have wanted to. So I've actually seen this issue many times in my TAC days and escalation where a customer has a global contract and they have very similar naming schemes for the global contract versus the VRF local contract. they mistakenly add the global contract instead of keeping it local to that VRF. And what happens is that exports the subnet to the other VRFs where that relationship exists. And if that subnet is intended to be isolated to this one VRF only and gets leaked to the other one, that can cause a connectivity problem. Okay, so we know for certain that this is going to break flows in these particular VRFs, and we can alert you based on a configuration error that you might have not necessarily caught otherwise when your brain is busy looking at raw XML and JSON, right? It's a pretty non-trivial exercise to go through that. So this is a very powerful tool that we're trying to have customers leverage, and I think it can prevent a lot of outages if we actually go and we use this tool to mock up some of our changes in our ACI fabric. Now, there's a lot of other features that we can go through. One of them is the connectivity analysis. Unfortunately, I am not on the 6.0 release that supports that. We can do a separate session on that if you'd like, but we basically have the ability to go and trigger ELAM captures and then also correlate that to the hardware state. So for example, let's say you use flow telemetry and you're like, hey, I have a packet being dropped via a no contract, right? Well, that contract, maybe that's supposed to exist. Maybe the configuration that you pushed is intended to allow that communication. We can run a connectivity analysis to go and ELAM it, and then also understand what the hardware state of that TCAM is to understand if there is some problem that we need to remediate, and also suck in any anomaly data that we have to help you isolate that problem. Yep. The final thing I want to show you is conformance. Now, I'm very fortunate. This lab fabric is brand new. It's all FX3 hardware, GX spines, some of the latest and greatest software. So I'm probably not going to have to worry about upgrading my hardware or software, anytime soon. But let's say you're operating a fabric with some older hardware or some older software. What we can do with this feature is that we can actually forecast whether or not you're going to need to do planned upgrades or planned maintenance events based on your hardware and software conformance, right? So you can see here, if I did have devices that were end of life, they would show up as major or critical, depending on if it's something I have to fix within the next 6 months or something that I should have fixed last year. But we give you this dashboard to not only consolidate the model of switch and all of the details of that, but also tell you in a pretty clear and concise way, this is something that I need to address, something I need to upgrade, something I need to swap out, right? And so we give you this tool as a very clear and consolidated approach to planning your major maintenance events and planning any major upgrades or swaps of hardware. Now, there's other things that we can do. So just to wrap up, we can integrate with vCenter. We can integrate with Orchestrator, right? So let's say that I wanted to, for any anomaly or any drop that I had, I wanted to also see whether or not those were virtual machines that were impacted and maybe what those VM names are, right? We can actually integrate with a vCenter server as well, okay? So let's see, if I go and do get the address, 230, 223, 247. We'll call this TME vCenter. And we give it the credentials. We can then go and we can associate sites. So we'll just go ahead and associate site 1 for now, because we'll have to go back and check to make sure site 2 is working properly. After that initializes and comes online, it's going to go and query all of the VMs, networks, hosts, storage, all of that, so that you can see all of those through Insights as well. We click on the vCenter. And then it'll go and take a second to collect the data, but it will go and be able to populate all of that data here. We can go and check it afterwards. So one final thing I wanted to go through, which is how our site looks like it's onboarded. It looks like it's getting telemetry data. I think we did a decent job of configuring the in-band network and connecting ND. If you ever wonder what the status is, or if something's not working, or hey, I was expecting to see these endpoints, you can look at the system status for a site. And you can see here that we give you actually, a clear indication of when there was a last updated endpoint, statistic, or resource. So if any of these are not working, or if you're not getting statistics from the fabric within a reasonable amount of time, you can go and just make sure that, again, that the in-band is working for you. Something that you should have seen when you onboarded the site directly in ND, but just another way you can go about and getting visibility into what the telemetry status is for a certain site. Now, it looks like I do have a bug scan here that's looks like it's violating some memory consumption that I might have to look at. But in general, you can see that all of the telemetry is green and working. So that is really what I wanted to demo for you today. I think we're at the top of the hour, so it took the full 45 minutes there. Are there any questions that we can perhaps go through, maybe?
There are a couple that we haven't responded to just yet. One is, how long will flow telemetry be stored in Nexus Dashboard Insights?
Yeah, that's a good question. So by default, we store data for 7 days within Nexus Dashboard Insights. It's currently not configurable, but we are looking to expand some of the time horizons for some of that data. So 7 days.
Right. And then, let's see. If flow telemetry is exported to an external storage, can we search against that from Nexus Dashboard Insights?
Yeah, so that's actually another cool feature, is that we can also export the anomalies and flow data to storage devices. But yes, it'll still be kept on the system for the 7-day interval as well. The cool thing about that, though, is that if you have a large storage array or storage syslogging platform, then you can keep data for longer, really.
Yeah, but they're also looking at being able to search that against from Nexus Dashboard Insights, but we don't have that capability.
Oh, so you're saying like be able to go and query the external collector and say, no, that's a good one though. Let's take that one back. Maybe we can feed that back to product management or perhaps Carlos.
And then let me see, I think there was one more. Actually, 2 more. Is vCenter the only virtual machine platform that has an integration available or planned?
For vCenter, for integrations, well, so we have for virtualization in that context, yes. I do think there are plans to integrate with KVM and other platforms, but not currently implemented today on the latest release. We can follow up on that one too.
Great. And then let me see. I think there was one more. If I have ACI as app-centric and want to use Insights as compliance to see all the flows that are denied by my contracts, will it be limited by the flow rate? Yes,
it will be. And that's because unless you can see the flow and process that flow, you won't be able to see if it's dropped, right? So that's a really good use case though. Be able to see what's being dropped, what the source and destination IPs are, ports are, and then use that to build contracts. You can do that to an extent. If you enable, an all zero subnet on FT and start exporting all flows, I think you'll probably run into scalability issues. But if you have maybe a certain application or a certain subnet or a group of subnets that you want to enable, and then you'd be able to filter all of your FT data based on drops, you could go and look at what's being dropped for a policy drop, which is basically I don't have a contract. And then you'd be able to know, hey, this specific source and destination on these source and destination ports is being dropped due to no contract. So it's not a tool that we would typically use for an application dependency mapping. I know that that's something that we typically had tetration for, but it's still possible to do it on a smaller scale. Yeah.
Great. And then let's see. 2 more questions. Can we customize all views to be added in executive dashboard? So I'm not maybe in the Nexus dashboard itself.
I guess I would have to understand a little more what the.
Yeah, it looks like, for example, can we add support to add topology view to custom dashboard?
So the topology view is actually interesting. We're going to be revamping that in a coming release. And when we do that, among other new features, we'll do another webinar, I think, to kind of go over that. So maybe we table that one until that release, and then we'll get some feedback on the new topology view.
All right, and then provide the different custom level the different customizations we can do for the dashboard.
Yep.
But
and then I'm seeing
All
Stuart. Hey Stuart, I'm just going to say you have a comment in the chat. Can you send privately your email? I'll get in touch with you and we'll discuss that. So you can, if you just paste your email to me directly in the chat, I'll reach out. Looks like we did launch a survey. If you wouldn't mind, just take a few seconds. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you didn't like. I did also want to just remind everyone again that we are going to be doing a similar session for NXOS, leveraging Nexus Dashboard Fabric Controller. So basically, how do I get similar visibility of my NXOS deployments into Insights? So we're treating, we're talking about Insights from the perspective of both ACI and NXOS. There'll be a separate session for that, which you can register for if you'd like. So
great. Well, thank you everyone for attending, and please fill out the survey if you have not done so, and we'll catch you again. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone.